Hi humans, I'm Julio from Cannabetic podcast, and today we sit down with Alfredo Lopez, who's a senior marketing specialist holding a master's behavioral psychology degree from University of Chicago. We also cover various topics from traumas, addiction, raising children, and we dive into Alfredo's unorthodox work journey and how he became a psychedelic advocate and the benefits it had on him. Hey, one more thing before we go. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do because it helps out with the whole YouTube algorithm of growing the channel. And the most important part is you're going to hear a lot of innovative people. We're going to talk about hemp, cannabis, sustainability, tech, and pretty much everything in between. So hopefully I'll see you on the other side. Catch you later.
Alfredo, thanks for coming on. And it's kind of funny how we met. It was LinkedIn again, which is most of the amazing people that I've connected recently was through LinkedIn. And it was through psychedelics. And I explored your profile, and you're just one of those interesting people that kind of looks like an orthodox, what is the right word? Polymath when it comes to everything from your background to what you're doing now and kind of moving into psychedelics. So thanks for coming on, man.
I appreciate that. Thanks for the invite. I'm excited, obviously, to dive into this conversation on psychedelics and psychology, and any other topics that touches on. So thanks for the invite. I think it's a cool opportunity, and hopefully we can provide some value here.
Yeah, definitely. I try to kind of plan this podcast out before, and I'm like, what should I start off with? Because there's a few different phases. Obviously, the main topic will be about psychedelics because that's how we that was the touch point that we started interacting about. But let's kind of go back, 2009 and 2010, University of Chicago psychology. Can you talk a little bit about your background, how you got started, and then maybe phase over into psychedelics?
Definitely. So I would say that my career at university was a little bit unorthodox. What I mean by that is that I remember being in the graduate program, and literally every single person I met in the graduate program, you could tell that they put in a lot of thought into why they were there. What I mean is that they had a roadmap. I don't know if they had guides or somebody that was kind of mentoring them, but they're like, no, I'm here as a stepping stone towards, B, or I'm here just as the latest step in my effort to get towards, this destination. And when I say that my experience was a little more unorthodox, was that I literally just loved to learn. I wasn't there for like a serious reason of like, I want to land this, this great job, or I want to, I'm using this as a springboard to land here or there. I literally was there because I was interested in psychology, and obviously University of Chicago offered a great opportunity for that. I did receive a full scholarship, and so I figured it was an opportunity that I couldn't pass up.
And to interrupt, but for people that don't know, University of Chicago, I think out of tuition is like what, 60, 70,000?
I'm sure with inflation figured in by now, it's probably a lot more than what it was 10 years ago.
So that's pretty it's pretty crazy that you got into. Anyways, keep going.
Sure. So I remember people being very taken aback when I shared that, because as I mentioned, people had what I considered a far more serious mindset. And I want to distinguish between seriousness and sincerity. I think you could do something and be serious, and it's kind of tense, and and I think you can just be sincere in your efforts, sincere in your pursuits, and still generate really great results. And so I think I was more approaching it from a point of view of sincerity. I was sincerely interested in learning. I was sincerely interested in meeting great people, being around great ideas, and really just trying to absorb as much of that as possible. And so for me, it wasn't like, oh no, this is just, and so what I think actually that contributed to my success, because a lot of the people, my colleagues at the time, were great people, insanely smart, which I've always liked, but they just seemed to be very strung out. They seemed to be just wound a little too tight. And, I remember making all kinds of invitations. Hey guys, let's go hang out. Hey, let's go get a drink. Hey, let's go for a hike. And everyone was like, oh no, that's absolutely out of the question. I need to.
What did they do? What did the regular psychologists do usually?
Well, these people were buried in the library stacks.
Really? Wow.
They were buried in the material. And obviously I did that as well. It's not like I was neglecting my duties, but the way I saw it is if you are nimble enough and flexible enough and in your mind, then there's an opportunity to do many things, a lot more than usually than we think that we're able to do. And so, I was able to, of course, execute my duties, my schoolwork, my research, meet with people. So part of the requirement was that we had to spend 250 hours meeting. In my case, I was meeting with people who were struggling with things like addiction, things like personality disorders, depression, suicide. Some of my other colleagues obviously perhaps may have had a slightly different focus, but that was the requirement. And because I was just having so much fun, because I didn't take it so seriously, I was able to, of course, fulfill all those responsibilities, but also make a little time to enjoy the beautiful city of Chicago.
Was there any backlash from your family or anything, not having like a linear path by any chance, just having like the end goal or anything at the end of school, like here, like you said in the beginning, just getting this job, this is where I'm going, versus being like true to yourself, personality, like seeking that truth and being open to many options, I guess?
I definitely experienced zero pushback from my family, and I'll share that part of the reason for that is that I'm Mexican born.
That's why I asked, because you're a foreigner like myself, and there's a whole stereotype of foreigner parents are a little bit crazy, especially if you move to the United States. They see as United States the opportunity of like the linear path, like opportunity is great, like, and get a job and do this and that, like 4 years of school, everything has to be fixed. So that's why I kind of asked.
So what's curious about my background is that we grew up dirt poor. So I migrated to this country, to the United States, when I was 3 years old. I was actually smuggled into this country via what what is sometimes called a coyote. A coyote is a code word for somebody that, has the capacity or the setup to be able to bring people from, in this case, Mexico, over to the United States. And so when I say that we grew up dirt poor, what I'm trying to communicate is that there was very little expectation. As far as my family is concerned, I'm virtually Elon Musk, which is to say that I've so far exceeded any expectations at all. I'm very different from anyone in my family in the sense that, I pursued an education, I pursued, ambitious projects. I wanted to be part of that ecosystem. And they would have been just as happy if I had just, upon graduating high school, got married and had kids and worked at, Target. As far as they were concerned, that would have been great. And so very different from anyone in my family, as I mentioned. And it's interesting you mentioned the polymath thing. That's something I've heard from many other people, but it's not anything I ever really considered of myself, but certainly my interests are broad. Yeah.
Do you feel like there was, even though you were interested and seeking after, specializing after psychology, if they're specializing after seeking, I guess, psychology master's degree and going through that, do you feel like it's more of like the new, like psychology is your glasses, the way you see the world through? Because after I've experienced that, like a little bit later in life, I dropped out of college twice. I tried to do psychology first, then I went into like tech and business, and then I experienced a boot camp with UX design, and that's where it was kind of like the stepping stone for me is, wow, this gives me an opportunity to see almost everything and kind of work with different products, physical, digital, and meet with people. And when you go on like user journeys and coffee interviews, it's like really nice. So was that maybe a kind of lens, psychology was like a lens to see the world through?
It certainly can be. It's hard for me to say if that's the lens through which I approached it, but it's certainly true what you say, that we all have a kind of a reality tunnel. We all have a kind of a filter through which we experience the world, for better or worse, right? Because filters, while they can enhance what we're experiencing, there's certainly an embedded limitation to it, of course. I would describe the reason I pursued psychology, for me, is actually quite clear. Is really, if I'm honest, it was an attempt, an effort to heal myself. It wasn't, at that point, I wasn't too much concerned with providing solutions for others or driving value for others or helping others. Of course, I always had that as as kind of one of my guiding tools, but really it was an effort to heal myself. I from a very early age I experienced quite a bit of violence in my home, but also in my neighborhood. I grew up in South Central Los Angeles, which has a lot of infamy, and you don't notice to what degree things are distorted until you're quite a bit older. When you're a kid, doesn't matter what your circumstances are, that is normal for you. That is, you think, well, this is normal because this is what I experience regularly at home and in my environment. Or I turn and I see my neighbors and they all look like me, act like me, talk like me. So this must be what normality is. And it's not until you're able to leave that cocoon where you're like, well, hold on a second. I grew up all kinds of fucked up, right? And it was at that point that I realized, well, I actually need quite a bit of help myself. I don't even know where to start, who to turn to. And so what I decided was, well, I was full of determination and a burning desire to figure that out for myself. That's what led me to pursue psychology. Of course, I'd heard from many people, many friends, that I had this ability to really sit with people, listen to them, try and understand them, and provide new perspectives and viewpoints from which they themselves may heal as well. So that perhaps may have been innate, but as I mentioned, my pursuit in psychology was initially an effort to try and address some of the issues that I felt I carried with me.
That's a very interesting point. Do you feel like, not sure if this is going to be biased, but do you feel like that maybe the career path is sort of like this to find how to heal yourself, or is it the path like to seek something more, like you seek psychology to heal yourself? Maybe deeply unconsciously people are trying to seek and fix their issues, and I guess their paths through, I guess for me it was designed because I was always seeking to see something, to have a, I guess a position or to have a job or something to do, to have a lens on it, to have like some sort of skill and give me like purpose, because like I said, I could do almost everything, work with physical, digital products. But do you feel like some people unconsciously actually seek to heal themselves through when they get older, when they get into college and they completely forget about that? Or is that maybe something that takes a little bit of time to uncover? Because it's a very interesting point. Because there's, like the whole balance between the job and the purpose and like the life, it kind of almost like makes sense that you figured it out yourself. And on this journey, you've acquired a skill that not only helped yourself, but you're helping other people as well.
Yeah, no, that's a fascinating question. I do think they go together. And you're right to suspect that there is an unconscious element there. I do think that whether consciously or unconsciously, the way that our life unfolds is for a particular reason. Whether you jump into business or engineering or medicine, it really doesn't matter. Obviously, we all come with different, I believe as human beings, we all have the same ingredients, but they're dialed at completely different levels. And so that accounts for why, people will pursue what they pursue, whether in this case, psychology or sports, etc. But yes, I do believe that subconsciously or at some level, we are forever seeking to connect with that greatest thing in us, that inner self that we suspect, but are not always really aware of. I think in my case, I became aware of it quite young, possibly just due to accident. And by accident, I mean that given just the tempestuous upbringing that I had, as I mentioned, going through domestic violence, going through violence in my upbringing. I mean, I was 8 years old and fighting on the streets regularly. And so when you have those type of experiences, when you experience suffering to that degree, and if you are open to it, because suffering will either take you over, or if you're able to distill the lessons from it, it can completely transform your life in a powerful and beneficial way. I think that's sort of what happened to me. Is I was exposed at a very young age to tremendous suffering, and it made me question things like, well, what is my role in this world? Why am I here? You know, what is life about, really? And that generated a certain awareness within myself, which ended up being a kind of a guiding light for me. I understand that that's not everyone's experience, but sooner or later we will face suffering in some way. And it's really in those moments, I believe actually those are transformative moments when we have the right mindset, when we're open to them. Of course, most of us make a life out of running away from suffering, but really there's a reason why suffering exists. And I believe it holds many of the answers that as individuals we're looking for if we're able to sit with it. So I think that's what made it a little bit more of a, let's call it, conscious effort for me. But yeah, I do believe that for people who have not had those insights or have, you know, made a habit out of running away from that, it does become operative at a much more unconscious level.
I wanted to track back a little bit about you talked about meeting people and you had 250 hours, I think, or something to do. And you mentioned you had to meet with addicts, and I got into psychedelics early on just through friends and having eclectic friends, very creative. But also I went through 2 years of drug addiction, and in one day of LSD experience, it just completely switched over. Like I just lost something off my shoulders, and it was just magical to me. But I wanted to talk about the people that you've met and like some of the research that you've done in the 250 hours, especially when it comes to addicts. Like, what have you learned from them, and like, what did you see, and like the initial expectations were, and what did you saw after, and analyzing them through your psychological frameworks.
Sure. So I'll speak from personal experience because I haven't kept myself updated on all the latest developments in that area in clinical psychology or all of that. But in my experience, I always considered addiction to be, and whatever the addiction was, right? We can be addicted to love, to work, to sex. The easiest addiction that comes to mind, of course, is to drugs of all kinds. But we can be addicted to relationships. We can be addicted to attention. We can be addicted to adrenaline-fueled experiences. And so one of the things that I always came back to was that addiction for me was an emotional imbalance, really an emotional disease. It's very easy for people to imagine a disease physically because the body is always verifiable. You say, "Where's my hand?" Well, there it is. But you say, well, where is this fear that I'm experiencing? And nobody can locate it, right? Or you say, where is that wayward thought that I had? And nobody can locate it. That's what makes it very difficult to identify some of these things. And so I considered addiction to be certainly an emotional imbalance, an emotional dis-ease. And, you know, not to get too Freudian, but I certainly was able to trace it back to experiences in youth, experiences in our developmental upbringing, you know, experiences that, while they're human experiences, even if they're of the suffering kind, of the traumatic kind, it's not the experience itself that does us harm. It's our inability to properly assimilate the experience and take from it what it has to offer us. And so I believe that trauma, let's say, it can either completely overwhelm you and really for the rest of your life if one is not able to assimilate, well, what is the message here? What is the significance of this occurrence? So that's one thing. That's the external event, you know, whatever the situation may have been. But if we are able to assimilate the experience, if we are able to understand that, well, hold on a second. Yes, this hurts. But there's also a kind of a silent voice behind it it's trying to tell me something. And it's trying to tell me something that may actually be fundamental to who I am. And so often the answers that we're looking for, they're hidden in the deepest and darkest places. They're not going to be readily available. So what I discovered with all manner of addictions was that there was something, or there was an imprint early on that was not properly assimilated and understood or digested. And therefore, you now become possessed with the energy that brought you, which is mostly going to be a negative energy. And so I'll describe just a generic example, hopefully to provide a little more clarity. You know, I once had a girlfriend, I won't name her, several years ago, and lovely girl, extremely talented. And I very quickly identified that she seemed to need me a lot more than perhaps, you know, than what I needed of her. She constantly needed of my attention. She constantly needed of my validation, to the point where, and to a degree that's normal. But in her case, it just went above and beyond. And I started to feel a little bit suffocated, very independent, total free spirit. And so when somebody's trying to put me in a cage, even if it's a golden cage, you know, it was a bit uncomfortable. And so rather than just, you know, push back or fight the issue, I try to get her to understand, hey, look, I'm noticing this behavior. So I never wanted to make it about her, the person, because her, the person, I really liked her a lot. I said, look, I noticed you have this behavior. Have you ever noticed that in yourself? And I was fortunate that she was receptive to this type of questioning, because if you ask people these type of questions, you will notice resistance immediately spring up in the average person. In her case, she was like, well, funny you mention it. Other, you know, some of her past relationships, past partners had mentioned something similar. And I think she, somewhere in her mind, she had bookmarked that as, hey, this might be something I need to look at some point. And then knowing her a little bit about her background and having met her parents, I quickly saw that in her parents, her mother was the dominant one. There's always a dominant figure and a more passive or receptive figure in parents, whether it's the father or the mother, but it's always going to be one or the other who is the more dominant driving force. In her case, it was the mother, who was a working professional and sounds like she was perhaps a workaholic. And so it seemed like she often neglected, you know, this person who was my girlfriend at the time. I'm sure as a child, she found herself, like all of us do, having many needs and wanting a little bit of attention and some validation and maybe somebody to cheer us on or help us, you know, get out of any issues we might be facing. And her mother was very stern, kind of cold, calculating, analytical type person. I think her strength wasn't necessarily to be nurturing or accommodating, and so you can imagine for what it must be like for a little girl growing up, and you're looking at your parental figures and going, man, well, I am not getting what I'm needing here. And so what do we do as human beings? Well, we need to fulfill those needs somehow. So then that's when we start to look into our peers, right? That's when we start to look outward, because if we're not getting our needs met at home, we're going to find them in the peer group. And that's when we can start to get into trouble because, you know, our peers are often just as lost as we are. And so they may not always be, you know, the best guidance. And so, you know, after discussing that with her, you know, over several months, you know, she was able to kind of come to a moment of truth within herself where she was like, good God, I had never noticed to what degree I had carried this pain with me, this pain of neglect, of abandonment. I'm not saying that that's what happened, but that's certainly how it was interpreted. That's how it was felt on her end. And funny enough, she had such a breakthrough. I say funny enough because it came at my expense, but she had such a breakthrough and had a kind of a fundamental moment of seeing into herself that soon after she was almost a different person. The way she carried herself, the way she spoke, And then I think she quickly dispensed with me because she was like, wait, now that I feel a little bit more whole, I actually don't need to be hanging around this guy too much anymore. So that's just a quick illustration of how these things play out. I don't want to make it seem like if, I've mastered all these things as if it's as simple as that. Obviously, we're complicated creatures, human beings. We're made up of all of these various networks within the body, within our emotions, within our minds. And it's very difficult to make sense out of a machine that has so many components, both physical and otherwise.
Do you think that, I mean, especially with the chaos going on right now, do you think everything starts at home from childhood usually?
I do. I do believe that. I believe that, well, I suspect, wouldn't say I believe, but I suspect that as human beings, we come into this world with a certain hardware already. And we're all familiar with software. We're all constantly downloading new apps and new programs. That's what our environment generally will imprint on us. And of course, the immediate environment is always going to be the home. Whatever that looks like for you. It could be single parent home. It could be, you're lucky enough to have your mother and father. Sometimes, I hate to say it, but you may be unlucky enough to have your mother and father, depending on what the dynamic is there at home, right? And so I do think it starts at home because you come already with a certain hardware, with certain talents. But beyond that, from day one, you're already being told who you are. You are this. You're immediately slapped on with all of these various labels of nationality, of gender, and some of these are stretch further back into the family itself, right? You'll have families where generations upon generations of lawyers, right? Why is that? Well, it's either these guys are just sensational, debaters and presenters, and or it's that imprint is so strong, oftentimes, forced upon the individual, that it's almost as if their free will has been removed from them, and now they've been put on this path. I do think it starts at home, and the reality is that for many of us, independent of where we grow up, the family dynamic is not always harmonious, right? Life happens. Parents, we're often overwhelmed. I'm a parent myself. I really struggled probably the first couple of years of being a dad. I had no idea what I was doing, completely out of my depth. But I was filled with that burning desire to do things right. And had I not had that, I think I'd be in some deep waters right now. But I do believe that. I remember something that my grandfather used to say, who had kind of a shamanic element to him. He said, everybody wants to change the world, but nobody wants to do the dishes. And the reason I bring that up is because
I just had a post about dishes today.
yeah, the temptation is always to look out, to go out and solve the world's problems, to go out and solve my friend's problems, the neighbor's problems. But another way to think of it starts at home is by saying it starts with me. You are the only home that you ever carry with you 24/7. Independent of the location, you're at home in yourself. And if you have a disordered mind, if your emotions are wayward or perhaps too volatile, or perhaps some of us are struggling with physical ailments of all kinds, then things are not right at home. My suggestion to people has always been, hey, look, it's venerable, it's honorable to go out and try to help, to go out and try to provoke change, positive change in the world. But that is a later step. You have to really start with yourself and try to address that to the best of your capacity. If you need help, that's fine. Help is available. But take care of that first, because otherwise you're only giving what you have. It's impossible to give something that you don't have. And I see so many people fall into this trap, this temptation of well, my friend is struggling, so I'm going to go help, or so-and-so is struggling, so I'm going to go help them. Okay, sure. But if you yourself are not in order, what kind of results do you think you're going to generate? You can only give what you have. And if you have disorder at home within yourself, then guess what? That's going to be reflected in your outcomes.
I wanted to ask you, was there any studies done? I'm fascinated by Jung and just different personalities, and I actually have a few books behind me. Was there any studies done in, I guess, the spectrum, how the kid changes versus if the kid is living with the single parent dad versus a mom? Was different because I believe in like the different energies, or I read about them and it's kind of interesting. Is there proof or any research that if a kid is growing up, if a boy is growing up with a mother, single mother all of his life, it's more likely to turn out this, or he has these type of tendencies versus maybe a girl's growing up with a father, she has these tendencies and vice versa?
So off the top of my head, I can comfortably say that I'm sure there are studies like that out there. I'm not familiar with any off the top of my head. What I will say is that independent of growing up with a mother or a father, there is such thing as energy. And it's important to have both what we can call a masculine energy and a feminine energy. In an ideal setting, you want to have both, and because you can't grow. It's not fair to a person to grow up with only a masculine influence. You know, that might lead to the next Genghis Khan, right? And it's not fair or right to grow up only with a feminine energy, because I don't know, that person may end up being a hippie. I'm not sure, but it's really important. Life is a dance between the two. You know, the reality is that every single person has masculine and feminine capacities. In men, typically, though of course there are exceptions, the accent of that is on their masculine energy. In women, typically, though of course there are exceptions, the accent of that, you know, their center of gravity is in the feminine. We're all aware of the people with whom it's the opposite, right?
Yeah.
There are such thing as effeminate men and masculine women, but I always think of it in terms of the energy behind it. And so a woman who is masculine, let's say, or can do, and assuming she's balanced and a good person, can do just as great a job as a man who is masculine. So I think so long as you have those two energies at home and they're harmonious and working together, I mean, that's the ideal setting. Unfortunately, it happens very rarely.
What can a person do, especially, I guess, a younger adult or just a younger person that grew up with a single parent and was unconscious of the missing energy, like you've talked a story about your ex-girlfriend? Is there some approaches that you've seen that had positive results on them, or is there a path where they could start to, I guess, going inwards a little bit more?
Definitely, there has to be, that has to be the focus, and that has to be the exclusive focus for a very long time. What we need is really a lot more moments of seeing. We often believe, though incorrectly, that we know exactly who we are. And the reality is actually dramatically different. I mean, it doesn't even belong in the same room. It's of a different order altogether. Having said that, we are not skilled enough usually to be able to see ourselves as we are. What we usually experience is the image of ourselves. Now, often that's an image that we, again, falsely believe that we have cultivated for ourselves, but really there's been a lot of contributions into that image. Your environment, your parents, if there was a religious upbringing, that's an influence. The political landscape at the time, you know, obviously your family history, the particular friends that you associate with. All of that goes into forming this image, especially when you're younger. Whatever adult authority figures you have around have a large play in that. You know, we're all familiar with this notion of little kid gets into trouble, and, you know, the mother or the father may come around and say, "Hey, Peter, that's not like you." Well, if it wasn't like them, they wouldn't behave in that way. Of course, they have some type of energy inside of them that makes them behave in such a way. But now here comes the authority figure who tries to, you know, put things in nice little boxes. You're not like that. You're like this, right? You're such a nice little boy, Peter. Why are you behaving like this? Well, the influence there, the imprint there is that I, as the parent, because I don't want to struggle, I want this kid to be a nice little boy, right? Now, that may be useful for the parent, at least in the short term, but there are dramatic negative effects potentially for the child because at such an early age, we are not conscious enough yet to make the determination of whether this is something useful or valuable or whether it's something to be discarded entirely.
Is there a, I'm not sure if it's the right question to ask, is there a different, I guess, chemistry in your body when, or different changes versus, I guess, I don't know if you call it natural. If you grow up with two parents and everything's fine, you get the both energies versus one. Is there a chemical change in your body growing up, like for girls or boys, and carry those out, or is that?
Well, I want to say yes. You know, we're all aware of the general chemicals in the body for such thing as happiness, right? Well, fair amount of serotonin, fair amount of dopamine. You know, these things, I would imagine that in a person that grows up in a well-balanced way, their serotonin receptors are probably firing on all cylinders. Whereas for the rest of us, they may sputter here and there and occasionally work just fine and occasionally not so much. I don't feel qualified enough to speak as to the chemistry of the body, but at a high level, I would suspect that absolutely there is a significant and very notable difference in the biological chemistry of a person who grows up, again, assuming things are all harmonious and well balanced versus how the rest of us grow up, right?
It was a very interesting first 40 minutes. I wanted to kind of transition, start going into your personal like work, marketing, and then obviously psychedelics. But what a question that I wanted to ask, like, what are something people misunderstand about psychologists, or specifically maybe you and your friends?
That's an interesting question. I would say a common misperception of a psychologist is that they read minds. You know, I certainly don't feel like I'm a mind reader. If anything, it's probably closer to the truth to say that a psychologist is really more of either an energy reader or a body reader. What I mean by a body reader is that think of your body as the physical instrument of your subconscious. And so while a person may lie, your body will not lie. You know, so while a person may, you know, distort the truth, your body will never distort the truth. You know, so I'm very aware of things like nonverbal cues, body language, the way a person expresses themselves, the way they stand, their manner of dress, their, you know, outward dress style. All of these things are languages for those who are, you know, skilled and fluent in those languages. And so I like to say that people are open books, and we really are. You know, you meet somebody and instantly you'll have at least an impression that, while it doesn't capture the whole person, of course, is at least enough of a cliff notes to give you a sense of what they're about. You know, we have such a thing as a gut instinct, right? Well, what is the gut instinct? Well, it's a series of networks, you know, that collect around, you know, the solar plexus, which we now know is another brain in the body. You know, traditionally we consider the brain as, you know, that sponge we got up here in between the ears. But we've now identified that there are actually other brains in the body. One of them is in the gut. It's actually the gut that produces the most amount of serotonin in the body. And so I think that's a misperception commonly of psychologists, that we're psychic or that we're mind readers. It's like, no, I don't need to be psychic, because you are telling me through all these nonverbal cues, through this body language, through the way you express yourself, you're telling me quite a bit about yourself, which I know to be true. So again, I said, people may lie, but your body will not lie.
Another question actually kind of came in. You talked about being a father and not knowing what to do, but you're trying to do your best. What does the best or the ideal self mean to you, and how do you, I guess, approach it?
So by the best, I mean that I want to try and generate as many positive outcomes as possible. Now, I don't deceive myself. So the aim is never perfection. That's fool's gold. So I don't beat myself up when I make mistakes, and I do make mistakes. So that's important to have, because a lot of people, they'll make a mistake, they'll beat themselves up for a year. That is neither profitable for yourself nor for your children. If they see that, oh wow, dad makes a mistake and he's beating himself up, that means that when I make a mistake, the natural behavior here is for me to beat myself up. And you see how these things begin. So instead, it's far easier and more powerful to simply admit to your mistake and apologize to your children. Hey, you know how I lost my temper back there? That's totally my fault. I was upset because now I see that I didn't know how to properly deal with the situation. I was frustrated at that. It's a frustration that was really about myself. And unfortunately, I took it out on you, and that's wrong. So I want you to know that I'm sorry. And one of the things that I can do moving forward is to be more aware of that, so that we can avoid that. A child, for whatever their intellectual capacity may be, will understand. I promise you they will understand, because they'll sense the energy from which that's coming, if it's sincere, right? If it's one of these, oh, I fucked up, my bad, then I don't know how sincere that is, right? So, but if we can be sincere, then something translates over, something carries over to the child, where they'll see like, oh, okay. Oh, well, even my parents make mistakes. That must mean that it's okay if I make mistakes as well. And so I think having that attitude to generate as many positive outcomes as possible, knowing that there'll be some negative outcomes here and there, but to try and limit those, I think that's the way I approach it.
I don't know how to, I guess, ask the question. Do you think kids, because of their intellectual capacity, are more keen to the awareness of like your verbal cues and your tone of the voice? And when you said like they will understand if you tell them in a sincere way, obviously that has to do a lot with your body language. If you're uptight, your shoulders are back, and all that stuff that goes in. Do you think they're a little bit more aware because of the intellectual capacity, meaning like able to communicate verbally clearly? They pick up on those cues a little bit more than, I guess, the verbal.
Absolutely. Kids are masters of this, generally more so than adults, because adults, we already come with all the excess baggage that we all carry. Kids, maybe they don't have so much baggage yet, but they're starting their collection. But the way they initially experience the world, you're right, because their cognitive abilities, as far as I know, don't really start to develop significantly until around age 7. So you're talking about 7 years where the way they're experiencing the world is through, as you mentioned, a lot of nonverbal cues. And so parents, if you're listening to this, take note of this, because this will be very important. What you say to your kids is of far less value than how you say it. Doesn't matter what, we all have the experience as parents of, good God, I've told this kid 1,000,000 times. Well, how about you say it once from your heart? How about you sit down with them like a person and open your heart and be humble and sincere and say it once? And I promise you, if you can do that, you'll get the result that you're looking for. But that's not what we do, right? We beat them up. I don't mean that physically, but I mean emotionally or psychologically. why can't you do this? Why can't you do that? I've told you a million times. What's wrong with, right? All these frustrations that all you're really telling the child is, oh, I'm a bad kid. Oh, I'm dumb. I don't understand. Oh, why can't I do this? What's wrong with me? Terrible message, and in fact, the exact opposite of what most of us parents are trying to communicate. I don't know to what extent you can place accountability on the parent. Obviously, they should be accountable, but if you consider that parent as a child, and if they never got this education, then how can we expect that suddenly they've figured out the solutions when the way they've been brought up and the way they've been programmed has not allowed them to solve for those issues.
How do parents can do better when it comes to, I guess, comparing, or I guess showing or displaying a path of progress versus, like, in terms of, you got to be here, your neighbor, your cousin is doing good in English, but you're not. And like this whole comparative like aspect, when you're growing up, everything is compared to somebody else versus like, hey, I know you're not good in English, or I know you're not good in this specific subject. Can we do something to make up for this? Or can we do something? Is there anything that our parents should do a little bit different when it comes to that approach? When it comes to, I guess, what's the right word? Giving them reward, some sort of like reward, and not comparing it to their grades or anything that, or to their, especially, I think the biggest thing for me personally was comparing somebody to my mom's friends or, family members, like, hey, this guy is doing this, but you're not doing that.
I think it's okay to compare internally.
Mm-hmm.
What I mean by that is, in your own mind, it's almost a temptation to compare, right? It's almost like we can't help it. Now, I don't think there's too much trouble with that if we do it internally, which is what I mean by that is, if I, within my own mind, say, well, that's interesting. My son appears to struggle in this area, but his cousin is excelling. Of course, the opposite is true and will always be true, that your child is exceptional in some areas where those same other children are not. And so it's important to keep that in mind. Now, I think there could be value in that if done internally. Now, the minute we externalize that and communicate that to the child or with other people, I think that's a problem. I think there's no real benefit in that. The benefit can come if you, within your own self, are able to address, some of these concerns, or then, okay, you can compare and say, oh, okay, well, actually, it turns out I see that his cousin has had a lot more support in this area. So perhaps if we provide a little more support, it could bring our child up to speed. But it's never good, and it's never advisable to compare externally, which is to say, to tell the child, why aren't you like them? Or why can't you be more like the neighbor boy, right? Or the neighbor girl? It's a huge injustice to the child, because the message there is, you are not enough. And until you are at that level, like the neighbor boy, like the neighbor girl, there's something the matter with you. Again, that's a horrible message to send. And most parents, I'm sure, would be horrified even at the thought. Again, these things are happening at an unconscious level. Most of us are not conscious or aware that this is what we're doing, but this is in fact what is most commonly happening.
What do you think about this new age of the new therapy apps and I guess the virtual therapists and all that, just having it at your hand? Do you see that as a positive aspect? I've heard bad and good reviews about those type of services. And especially in times like these, I know that I've saw a few statistics, depression and anxiety and everything's been up, obviously, due to the circumstances.
I think that it can be a valuable starting point if somebody is starting from zero, from scratch. Mm-hmm. And because so many of us have these embedded behaviors with technology. The reality is most of us are addicted to technology. And so there's already a series of behaviors that come with that, where we can consistently engage in these behavioral loops. And so that can be valuable in the beginning if you're starting from zero, where you just need to create the habit of spending time with yourself. In this case, let's say through an app. However, there will come a point, if a person is sincere and they've started with an app or with technology, there will come a point where you will have to discard it, because any medium that you use shapes the actual outcomes that you generate. So you can't really separate the two. And as far as I know, there's a long history of meditation or spiritual practices in historical periods in areas of the world where there was no such technology, right? There were no apps of the day or whatever the case may be. And oftentimes the results were a lot better, almost as a direct result of not having those competing influences or distractions. And so I think it's valuable for somebody. Matter of fact, I've only ever recommended things like that for somebody that I know is starting from scratch, because I want them to get a sense of what this is really about, what this line of questioning and exploration is really about. And if their easiest entry point is through technology, I think that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
But for any serious or sincere person, there will come a point where you will need to discard it and be like, no, ultimately, technology is just yet another crutch that we hold on to. The goal here is that you need to be at peace with yourself, by yourself, without any other crutches. If you need crutches, it's a sign that there's still perhaps an element of fear there, an element of insincerity with ourselves.
One more question before we transition about kids. I noticed and I've read about the phenomena when somebody has a kid, sort of the intent of life and purpose changes, where you're almost doing everything for the kid's future versus almost like yourself. Has that happened to you by any chance? Have you seen like a different, I guess, just different experience after having a kid? Do you like it just flipped over or something, or?
It definitely sends you for a tailspin. I can think of, I can't think of too many, transformative experiences, because it's so organic.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like taking a substance or a medicine. It's an organic process to give birth to a child or to have a child. And suddenly you're faced with the prospect of, oh, wow, all of my conditioning up to this point has in no way prepared me for how to bring up another person. I have a hard enough time doing that with myself, let alone, guiding somebody for the rest of their life, right? And so it has to be a balance, and it's something that people have to identify for themselves. The temptation will always be to, pour everything out of yourself into your child and be there unconditionally and at all times. But if you're doing that at the expense of yourself, then that also sends the wrong message, because sooner or later you will be so completely depleted, whether physically or psychologically, that you won't be able to generate good outcomes from that position. If you are depleted, we all know what this is like in the workplace. Can you execute your best work when you're exhausted? Absolutely not. When you've had a sleepless night, when you're having problems at home, whatever the issue may be, when you're behind on your bills, you cannot be at your best. You cannot operate at your best. And so it's not advisable to want to give everything to your children at the expense of yourself, because sooner or later you'll be so depleted that all your outcomes will be negative, because you're operating from that point.
Is there at least like a micro filter when you make decisions today after having a child in the back of your head? Maybe do you kind of compare, like, is this good for the future of the child or not? Or you because you're a psychologist and you're a little bit more open, you understand those versus a regular person. Do you happen to notice those as well?
I do try to plant seeds for the future, but what I'll share is that I'm not too focused on the future. I try to be more focused in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Because if in the moment you can plant a good seed, then you can rest assured that at some point in the future, that seed will blossom. But to try and confront situations, and if you're thinking, if your mentation is already focused on the future, then my sense is that you're doing injustice to the moment, because you split yourself into being partly in the moment and partly in some imaginary future that only you can look into. And some of that will filter into the outcome.
All right, let's transition into your personal life. So when it comes to actually working, you took a drastic change. So you started a marketing agency straight out of psychology school. That's completely opposite of you taking a 9-to-5 position weekly and doing behavioral psychology. What made you go in that route, and what did your friends, especially close to you, tell you?
Yeah, so this is the funny part. We're going back to how so much of what I've done has been rather unorthodox. So right after graduate school, this was summer of 2010, I moved back to Los Angeles, where my family is, and I actually jumped into education. For a long time, ever since I was young, I had this kind of imprint in my mind that I wanted to be a teacher, I wanted to be in education, and was fortunate enough to do that, only to quickly identify that, oh, hold on a second, this actually is not the right fit for me. I don't feel comfortable here. Frankly, what I did least was teach, and most of what the job was, managing all forms of politics and administrative issues. And I'm a very unorthodox thinker and player, because I feel like I'm able to identify unorthodox connections that I feel are based on first principles rather than, what the trend of the day may be. And so that's always the way I've operated. I've never been afraid to break rules or bend rules or discard the rules in the interest of generating a good outcome. The rules are there for a reason, and obviously they should be respected up to the degree that they're valuable. And when they're not valuable, then I think it's okay to dispense with them. Very quick example of that, let's say we all know the value of a stop sign, right? The stop sign is designed for us to have greater awareness, situational awareness of where we're at. Are there any people, any animals around, any other cars? Okay, I'm free to go. Okay, now I can move forward. But if you're in the middle of a desert and there's nobody around you for 800 miles, really don't see the value of throwing up a stop sign there and actually stopping, right? I mean, unless you're stopping for the birds or the clouds, it doesn't make a lot of sense. So I've always enjoyed playing with the rules, bending them when I think that it's valuable, not just for the sake of it, not to be some thrill seeker or some contrarian. There has to be a practical basis for, how we operate. Now, of course, it's easy to say that, but when you're in an environment of work, the powers that be don't usually like when somebody is, experimenting or tinkering with different models, even if you're generating great outcomes, a lot of times there will be resistance because, oh, no, that's not how we do it. Well, yes, but we're generating great outcomes here. Isn't that the goal here? Well, yes, but, right? And then we all know where that ends up. So I quickly realized I didn't want to do that. I left education after about a couple years. And then I remember one evening with my wife, who naturally was a little bit nervous because I was out of a job, and, she was, pressing me a little bit for some answers, for some comfort, for some security. And I remember saying entirely spontaneously and almost flippantly, "Don't worry, babe, because I'm going into marketing," not knowing even what marketing was, not having any experience in marketing, not having any connections or background in it. But somehow, perhaps my subconscious spoke for me in that moment, but that's what came out of my mouth. And then from that moment forward, I was possessed with this burning desire of like, well, if I said that, it's because that's what I'm going to do. And so I started very humbly. Actually, I had an internship where I was worked on marketing strategy. I worked on social media, emails, a little bit of PR. I quickly realized that when I had a natural I had the skill set for it already, unbeknownst to me. And when I paired that with an aggressive learning habit, because I've always been an aggressive learner, so I just have this insatiable desire to know for some reason. The two put together, led me to have great success and be able to climb the ladder very quickly. The agency, I think, was an excellent experience, but before jumping into that, I just want to see if you had any other questions beyond that.
No, I was just listening. If you wanna talk about the experience of, I guess, getting specifically into marketing, what was your first day like? And the background matters a lot. And when somebody sees masters in psychology, it's very attractive phrasing for anybody almost. How was the learning curve coming from a completely opposite? You went through teaching, school, and then getting into marketing. What was the learning curve like, and what did you learn, and how did you apply your skills to that?
So I'd say the learning curve applied specifically to the mechanics of it. As I mentioned, the skill set I seem to already possess, even unbeknownst to myself. But it was really adopting to the mechanics of it, the structure or infrastructure of it. Marketing, as in any other discipline, has a certain scaffolding around it. And that's what I needed to familiarize myself with. So you can have all the skill in the world, but if you don't integrate that into a specific functioning model, then it goes off to the side. And so that was where really the learning curve came in. I was already adept at working and speaking with people, building relationships, and being able to communicate things in such a way that it made the impact that I wanted. And by that, I mean an impact that would generate a great outcome for, the end user or the audience itself. And so those skills became very significant in the marketing capacity because, ultimately it's really about understanding people, from the position where they're at today, identifying what are their concerns and pain points and what are perhaps some of their desires. And then if it just so happens that your product or service or solution aligns or maps perfectly onto what they need, then it just becomes almost just a sensible, normal conversation. I don't want to downplay it and make it seem like it's that elementary, but it can be. I think ultimately we're human beings, and where I see marketers struggle is that they see themselves too much as marketers.
What do you mean by that? Is there like a clout they're chasing, or?
Yeah, I think that they are too attached to their title or position, and perhaps the power and leverage that comes with that they're perhaps a little bit seduced by it, and really they're seeking to serve their needs as opposed to the user's needs or the audience's needs. Whereas I really humble myself and think, well, I'm really looking out to solve problems for the end user and for the audience. And I think that comes across in my communication, in my exchanges with them. And that's how I'm able to build trust. There's this line that I picked up from the sales world that says, everybody loves to buy, but nobody loves to be sold. And we all know the difference between those two. Everyone's looking to buy stuff at all moments of the day. That's not an issue. The issue is that we do not like it when somebody is very clearly just trying to sell us, right? And so when I say there are some marketers who are, too caught up with being marketers, that's a little bit about what I mean, is that they're too focused on, making the sale, on, driving the conversion versus, well, I actually just genuinely want to help this other person because I know, even if I'm selfish about it, it's still practical to follow that path, because if you genuinely connect with them, then you'll generate business beyond that one touch point. You'll generate a customer for life, or at least for long term.
And how did you get out? When was the stop with the intern and then getting into a social chrome marketing agency?
Yeah, so initially had a sales job. Again, this happened rather accidentally. So it's funny how so many of the turning points in my life, I feel I've just been accidental, or that, or I have some guiding agents that's, pulling the levers behind the scenes. But I had applied for a job that at the time had social media in the title. This was around 2011 or so, I want to say. And that was an attractive proposition for me because I thought, oh, wow, like there are such jobs as social media something. And so I thought, well, let me jump into that, and ended up getting the role. First day on the job, I realized, well, hold on a second. Like this job is not actually managing social media. This job is selling social media services. Uh, and so rather than, just walk out the door, I thought, well, I'm here. I have a job, let me do the best that I can. And very quickly became a top performer at that company. And myself and a couple of my colleagues there who were also top performers, just in our own private discussions, realized, hey, you know what? We're doing so well at this. Why don't we build our own agency where we can effectively, provide similar solutions? We can tailor it our way. We obviously have a great deal of experience from being top performers here at this company. Perhaps we can generate a little bit more for ourselves and for our lives, by branching out and doing it ourselves. So that's kind of how we founded Social Chrome.
What were the first days like as a business owner? How was the whole? Did you guys already have connections built up at network, so it was easy getting clients, or was there some sort of like strategy around there where you guys came in and, all right, how do we go from zero to actually getting the first signed client?
So both. From the moment that we started, from day one, we already had probably about a dozen clients,
Oh,
because we'd started building it out almost as a side project to test it. And by the way, I never would advise for somebody to just quit their job and jump into a business. You can start your business while holding a full-time job and grow it up to the point where you have so much demand that it's now safe to transition out of your job and into your business, because now you have something to land on. A lot of people, while I admire the belief, you don't you don't want to leave your full-time job and go out and test the market if you already don't have traction, or at least a substantive customer base. And so we did migrate some clients that we had already, and because we'd also had a pretty nice book of contacts, by the time we founded it, we'd already spoken collectively with probably thousands of business owners around the country. So we had connections, we'd had conversations, and it became easy, or easier. It's never easy, but it became easier to build from there. Day one was filled with a lot of excitement, probably just adrenaline pumping through our veins for like a solid week. There's very few things I can compare it to go out on a limb and to start your own business and to try to attack the market and capture business. It's exciting beyond belief, but it also comes with in equal proportion a sense of responsibility and pressure, and that's something that a lot of people don't discuss. We're kind of seduced by the glitter of starting a business, but I try to counsel people and say, hey, look, well, are you ready to take on the pressure? Are you ready? Because there are no lifeboats here. Like, you are the lifeboat. Especially once you start having employees, then you're even more of a lifeboat, because they're looking to you for the solutions. They're looking to you for the support, the guidance, the direction. And so you need to be comfortable with that.
Can you talk about what were the challenges like in the beginning? Did you guys start off with just only a few people and then hired on a lot more? What were the challenges in the beginning? It means in terms of like team alignment and just taking on duties, because I believe when everybody's like a co-founder, everybody tries to take on a lot of roles and not really sit down and have a conversation. Hey, this is where your strength lands. Maybe you should focus on that point. What were some of the challenges in the beginning? And then when you started hiring more people, how did that change?
So we were able to flesh that out even before we opened our doors.
Mm-hmm.
And while we were all great salespeople, we certainly had other strengths as well. And so my strength seemed to lie as a marketer. I
Mm-hmm.
felt equally comfortable as a salesperson and as a marketer. One of my founders, or one of my partners, was just far and away just the best salesman of the three, and so it just made sense that he would be in charge of sales. That included hiring and training and obviously leading that effort. And then we initially actually had was three of us who founded it. Eventually became only two of us, but the other partner, he was just good at operations. So operationally, he helped, keep the lights on, keep he had set up all kinds of computers and phones for us, and he'd set up all the accounts for us. And so, like I said, we all felt comfortable selling, but it's a lot more than just selling to build out an agency. So that's kind of how we split up the responsibilities in the beginning.
And then when you guys started hiring more people, how did that, I mean, what was the feeling like too, just hiring somebody like, wow, we're actually like getting a new person on our team? And what are the challenges of actually introducing and integrating the person?
It was both exciting and a little worrisome, because of course you want to grow the company and you want to grow the business, and that inevitably means bringing on more team members. But we worked so well together, we gelled so well together, that when you bring somebody new into the equation, it's always a different ingredient. You never really know how it's going to turn out. And so it was exciting from the position of, okay, we're growing now. We have enough of a customer base where we're generating enough revenue where we can actually afford to hire, and it makes sense. That's exciting. But then obviously the dynamic will inevitably change, because every person brings in their own ingredients to add to the mix, and hopefully that admixture generates a good outcome for everyone. When was that moment when we finally decided to hire? Well, we had determined several thresholds that we needed to hit first before we could even bring on a single person. And so once we hit those thresholds, then that made it very easy for us to say, okay, now is the time. And then whenever we hit that next threshold, then we realized, okay, now we can bring on a second person, a third person, a fourth person. So we needed to determine all that from the get-go. It becomes very difficult to try to figure everything out on the fly.
Was there a culture change, or I mean, it's kind of like an overused word, but I guess I'm going to describe it as a culture change, since you started off with your close friends, buddy. So it's kind of like bros in the office. You get there and you kind of, I mean, quote unquote, shoot the shit, and it's like enjoyable. But then when you get an outsider that you don't maybe know, you're just bringing them for the interview. And how did that go through? Is like meaning of like team culture? Did you guys read books on team management, team alignment, or anything like that? Or was there new education or e-learnings introduced or anything like that?
So I remember that I personally was trying to push for that because my concern was that it was becoming a little bit too much of a bro culture. And, that became immediately apparent when we hired our first woman, where suddenly everyone was on their best behavior. But it was like night and day, right? Because, we'd already, had several months of running a certain way, operating a certain way. And I tried to kind of hedge against that, because I knew, well, we're not just going to hire men here. It's going to become an insane asylum in here. So, I thought, look, guys, like, I get it. We're having fun. I don't want to take the fun away. I get it. Everyone feels good here. I don't want to take that away. But at the end of the day, this is a business, guys. Like, and we can't, while it's okay to have fun and while it's okay for there to be some levity, you want to remember and keep firmly in your mind why we're here. We're not here to dick around. We're here to generate business and hopefully provide some solutions for our customers. So that needs to be the mindset, I think. Obviously, we're younger, so there's always some development to be had. But I remember trying to push for that, and coming up against some resistance. By the time we hired our first woman, she was an account manager. Then it became a much difficult behavior habit to adopt. Whereas if we were more successful in adopting that sooner, then perhaps it would have been an easier transition for us.
How did that come to an end? Is the agency still around? Did you guys just put a halt to it? Because I saw you transition into a bilingual marketing director, and it's kind of like interesting. You went from finding a business and then I guess going to work for somebody. It's a little bit of a different shift as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So part of the reason it closed was due to, well, a couple things. One of it is business related, and the other one was more personal. From the personal end, my partner, and by this time, when we were in the final days of it, his father passed away suddenly from cancer, and it really sent him for a tailspin. He actually went missing for like about a month. I couldn't find him. And, this was also a time when we were putting in something like 70 hours a week or so. And so I think physically I was already, at my pretty close to my breaking point, even if my partner would have been there. And when he was gone for that month, and suddenly now I'm steering the whole ship, we had probably about 9 employees at this point who were all looking at me and going, where's Tony? Where's Tony? Right. And I just had no answers for them. Right. Well, I don't know. And, energy is such a delicate thing that when you're in the same room together, then you can sense when something is off, so the employees sense, the team could sense that something was amiss. I think that started affecting performance. And we already had, several issues irrespective of that anyway. And so that led to me having something of a kind of a breakdown, whether it was a mental breakdown or physical. I don't know if I could really separate from the two, but, and that, I think, I would say you never want to get to that point where you have a breakdown, because a breakdown can completely shake you up to your foundations. I remember being so suddenly, for someone who is typically almost fearless, to go from that to suddenly, wow, like even minor things are affecting me and making me nervous. You don't want to be in that position. So we were kind of forced to close our doors, partly due to my partner's father passing away, but partly due to the fact that while we had built this business, it was also kind of a house of cards. And what I mean by that is that we were always great. Our real strength was in generating new business. So we never worried about incoming revenue, because we knew we could always sell, we could always bring in new business. Where we really struggled was that it was very difficult for us to keep that business for longer than, let's say, 90 to 120 days. And the reality is you're not really going to build a successful business if you can't keep your customers. Yes, there are like, a million people out there that may be interested in you, but if you can't keep them, it's only a matter of time. You're building a house of cards, and that's what happened to us. From there, you're right, I joined Camino Financial. At the time, was a venture-backed startup. It was founded by 2 Harvard Business School grads, twin brothers, Sean Salas and Kenny Salas. Great guys, outrageously smart, outrageously dedicated. And I can't recall too many people I've met who work harder than them. And they were going after, so they're a lending business. They were lending to small businesses. And, I had just come out of my agency where, I'd already spoken to thousands of business owners. And so that, I think they found was their, the biggest value they saw. I said, look, if you guys are going after small businesses, I have a book right here of, over 1,000 names that I can call right now. And I think that became an attractive proposition for them. They brought me on board as the bilingual marketing director. And then, we went on a good run. It was interesting because I'd never been part of at least up until that point, of a venture-backed startup. Mm-hmm. The pressure is insane, and the work load is insane. I think you have to be a bit insane to actually thrive in those conditions, because there's constant pressure. You're working on, I was a one-man wrecking crew. I was doing all the PR, the social media, the blogging, the email, the strategic partnerships, you name it, I had to do it. And while it's good, because when you need to stretch is when you're really forced to develop muscle. but you don't want to, you want your stretches to be within striking distance. Otherwise, you'll break. You don't want to stretch too much, because we call that the rack, right? When you're stretched a little bit too much. And so that was a valuable experience too.
What were the next few years like? Because I know you've we're still in the marketing, and then I think you started into your own consulting firm, or just as a freelancer.
So I'd been doing consulting since the day that Social Chrome closed. What I did was that I hand selected the people, the customers that we built the best relationships with, that I'd built the best relationships with personally. And I continue to work those accounts through my own personal consulting firm, which is really just me. And so I was able to manage the workload because I identified, okay, I can work with 5 clients, I can work with 10 clients, whatever that magic number was. I still had the freedom where I could continue to work that while looking for a full-time opportunity where, I can continue to develop also. So I've been doing that probably since those days. Even now, I still, work with clients. Sometimes I work with budding entrepreneurs who are looking to start agencies or who need help with brand or just simply how to sell. Those are things that I keep an eye out for. The years after that, though, were a bit tumultuous, largely because, I'd been laid off from my last 2 roles. And, that's something that you can never really see coming. And of course, it kind of sends you back to, to square one. But the mindset I have is that, those moments can be just as valuable, if not more valuable than, just consistent success. There's something about consistent success that can put you to sleep, that can lead to conformity, that can lead to just a little too much comfort. And when every now and then something comes by, whether of your own doing or whether externally driven, that puts you on your back seat, then it can help you to take a pause, to audit yourself, to see where you're at physically, mentally, emotionally, identify what mistakes were made, identify how you can take that next step forward, so that by the time you do take that next step forward, it's full of conviction. Mm-hmm. And so even when I had a step back, I always actually took 2 steps forward. So anytime I was laid off, I came back and actually was able to negotiate even higher salaries. So I don't think it was for nothing. And it actually ended up working out better in my case because, I might have been out of income for a few months, but by the time I was back working again, I had now increased my income substantially. And so I think that's largely due to the mindset that I adopted.
Is that something you cultivate, like awareness, when bad things, like shit times come around, you kind of know from personal experience not to stress out anymore, and you're aware of it? You're like, okay, this might get worse, but if I put enough effort and be consistent at it, something good will come out.
Yeah, part of it is belief, but also part of it is experience. And it's really more experience than belief, because you can believe, but you can kid yourself. But when you have experience, that's something that you can really hang your hat on. I say that as I see your little white hat over there in the back with the bear. Are those bears or?
Yeah, Grateful Dead.
And so as far as experience, this might sound a little strange, but on some level, I consider myself a professional sufferer. And what I mean by that is that I've been through so much already that, things don't have the same impact that they had on, negative things don't have the same impact that they used to have on me. Matter of fact, I just brush them off. It's like water off a duck's back. If anything, because I've been in more leadership roles, I've made it a point to, when I see that my team, struggling with something, if anything, I want to provide some of that counsel and say like, hey, what's going on? And help them understand that, this could be a valuable experience for them if they're open to it. And if we're not open to it, then that's when things end up overwhelming us. And so, being a professional sufferer, I take it as really as just bad weather. Weather, I don't care how bad it gets, is going to pass. You know, you can have the stormiest clouds, but soon enough they'll be gone, you know, without a trace. And it can be as simple as that, or it can be as hard as we, you know, unconsciously choose for it to be. Nobody is immune to suffering. If you're alive and breathing, you got problems. You know, that doesn't make you original or unique. You know, what makes us unique is, you know, what are the solutions that we're able to uncover in those moments? And furthermore, how are we enhanced by going through those situations? How are you enhanced by, you know, going and weathering those storms?
Okay, let's get into the most important, and that's actually how we connected with psychedelics. Let's talk about the first experience, how you got introduced. Was this before psychology? Was this after? So wanted to know about all that.
Sure. You know, I'd never actually been interested in psychedelics until around, well, 2006 was the first time that I tried psilocybin.
Mm-hmm.
But before that, I'd never been interested in psychedelics. I knew of them. I was aware of them. I was entirely ignorant about them. So I don't think that my ideas about them were well shaped at that time. But just as a background, probably since around age 4, I did have, I did consider myself as somewhat of a spiritual seeker. And so that led me to, on the surface of it, yes, I studied psychology because, you know, I couldn't find any such degree as like mysticism or something, or shamanism. Had there been one, or had I been aware of one, I may have pursued that. But my personal interest was in, you know, the religious experience, the mystical experience, you know, the transformative experience, if you will. And that led me to pursue studies and practice in, you know, various mystical traditions from around the world. At some point, I'd probably gone over most of the important religious texts from around the world, from various cultures. All of that in effort, as I mentioned earlier, to try and learn who I was. You know, so it was a fascination for those subjects, but largely because they were helping me understand who I was. So that's what kind of fueled my eventual interest in psychedelics. So right around 2006, a friend of mine who I was in the habit of discussing Alan Watts with, if you're familiar with Alan Watts. He's kind of one of my virtual mentors, I suppose.
Yep.
And, you know, he and I got into this habit of listening to some of the Alan Watts recordings around 2005, 2006. Somehow he came across some psilocybin, some magic mushrooms from a friend of his, I don't even know who. And we decided to go off on a day hike. This was in Santa Cruz, California. And, you know, I'd had an open mind about it. I remember not being in any way afraid or intimidated by it. If anything, I was excited at the prospect of, you know, having this interesting experience. But I certainly didn't know what was coming. You know, I feel like it blew the lid off of my mind. Matter of fact, the word psychedelic means something very close to that. Psyche, suke in the Greek is of course what we call mind today, and delos, the Greek word delos means to open or to make manifest. So it's literally something that opens your mind. We all have a sense of what that could mean in our ordinary everyday life, right? We say to someone, oh, you just have to have an open mind. But it's another thing to just organically in your depths, in the depths of your being, to like be split open in that way. It can be a rather terrifying experience, or it can also be, you know, something of just staggering beauty. So I had a great experience. They did have elements of religiosity for me. I don't suppose that that's everyone's experience, but because that was, you know, part of my who I was and some of what my interests were, I think that easily lent itself to that. You know, I had wonderful experiences, but I also had terrible experiences, all within the same trip. And so all of my trips have been what I always like to say is that every single journey that I've been on with psychedelics has always involved some percentage of just sheer absolute terror. I'm happy to say that that is usually around no more than 10% of the experience, whereas the rest of the 90% was just, you know, beauty, inspiration, love, and joy, you know, really at the level of divinity almost. I mean, it's hard to describe really with ordinary words. But I do like to emphasize the terror because we can be so caught up and wrapped up in ourselves that when you are dislodged from that, you know, it can be painful. It can be painful because, you know, we're wound too tight. We're identified and attached too much with ourselves, with our image of ourselves. Because if it were really ourselves, then I think we'd be a lot happier and in harmony with ourselves and with others. And so that was my first experience. I think that it confirmed a lot of what I'd studied in religion and mysticism. I think it further enhanced my belief, because now my belief was supported by, you know, this tremendous experience that I just had. Having said that, and the science, of course, has proven this time and time again, psychedelics are completely non-addictive. And for those of you who are skeptical of that statement, I can virtually promise you that if you ever try psychedelics even once, you will be in no real hurry at all to try it again. You know, even myself, what I consider myself an advocate for psychedelics. You know, the last journey I went on was in March of 2019. It's been over a year now. I think I'm good. I think I'm going to wait a little while. You know, I certainly feel no strong compulsion to go on another journey anytime soon, but I know the day will come. The day will come, and that's a personal choice that people need to make.
How did that? Were you in psychology already in school during the first time that you've?
No, so this was during my undergraduate years at the University of California in Santa Cruz. That was when I first tried psychedelics. Since then, one of the more powerful experiences I had with psychedelics was during an ayahuasca ceremony, actually here in California. I'm aware that many people travel to other parts of the world for those experiences. I'm sure there are many valuable experiences there, but I can't really speak to them from personal experience. My experience took place in a California desert. I guess just to preserve anonymity, I won't name the place, but in a California desert with a shaman that I met through one of my friends. It's actually very interesting the way it happened. I just moved back from Chicago in 2010 after finishing graduate school. And one of my friends who I studied and practiced Zen meditation with, he calls me up out of the blue. I hadn't even heard from him in like 2 years. Calls me up out of the blue and he's like, "Hey, Alfredo, I met a shaman. Let's go do ayahuasca with him." And I was like,
"That's how it goes."
And it kind of jarred me for a second, but then right after that I said, "Okay, let's do it." So it was like it was a proposition that I'd never had before. I was like, "What? Okay, yeah, let's do it." Rather than think too much about it or dwell on it, I just instantly just thought, you know what a rare opportunity here. This may never come around again. I don't know any shamans. So yeah, let's go try it. I mean, that was, I think, an order of magnitude greater than what I'd experienced with psychedelics before. I don't know if it was the context, because with the shaman, you know, he was able, along with his team, to provide something closer to like a ceremonial setting, something closer perhaps to what is considered a traditional setting, you know, for perhaps some of the shamans in South America, Peru or Brazil, wherever they may be. I don't know that I can verify like the legitimacy of the practices and ceremonies that took place, but I can speak to their efficacy because it provided a very powerful experience that I think without the shaman being present and without the team present, I think it's very possible I could have gone off the deep end. So I'll share a little bit about the story if we have time.
Of course, yeah. If you have time, that's the most important.
Sure. It was about 40 of us that day. I didn't know everybody there.
How did that feel beforehand? Because I got introduced to ayahuasca ceremony, but I never went. But just the aspect of, when somebody thinks of trips or summer experience, like, hey, you just want to be with your friends or a comfortable environment. How did that feel when you heard like 40 people, you're going to be around 40 people tripping?
Yeah, I can understand how that may be frustrating or intimidating for a lot of people. It didn't frustrate me in the least. By the time I arrived for the experience, I was so utterly possessed with my intention for doing that I really didn't pay too much mind to how many people were there or who was there or who wasn't there. There were some preliminary things that we had to take care of before that. Some of that included fasting from any meat products for, I believe, a week leading up to the ceremony. We also had to secure clothing in the color of white. So any type of white shirt or, some white pants or shorts, whatever, but so long as it was in the color of white. And it was also advised that we try to spend some time and identify, what is my real purpose and intention in doing this? Because they didn't really want anybody who was there just to get high or, because that would contaminate the experience to a degree. I'm not saying that that's a bad reason. I respect if that's somebody's reason for trying something, but I think that belongs in another setting and in another context than trying to do something ceremonially. And so I spent the week leading up to the experience, spending a lot of time with what my intention was, what I was hoping to get out of it. The interesting thing about ayahuasca, this medicine, is that the intention is very important because you will get what you ask for. And oftentimes that can come with a very big surprise. We think we're ready to hear and learn certain things, and then we quickly realize, oh wait, this is why I haven't knocked on this door for so long, because there's a big dragon at the other end of it, and I still don't have my armor and sword. And so I wasn't intimidated by that. It was about 40 of us. I only knew 2 other people who were there, who was my friend, who was the one that invited me, and another one of his friends who was a mutual friend of mine also. We sat in a circle. We hadn't eaten anything at all that day other than had some liquid, some water. Evening came, and well, first of all, I met the shaman, and my first impression was that if this guy is the shaman, then I'm the king of France, because this guy, this guy, I was a little skeptical at that point because I was like, well, what the hell did I just get into? Like, this guy is the shaman? He looked like, you wouldn't, you'd peg him for just, a common homeless man or something. This guy had bad teeth, bad kind of hygiene in general, and very short man. He spoke rather strangely, and I thought, well, whatever. There's something going on here, and I'm here for the ride, so let's go through it. I'll go back to that point later on, because then I eventually discovered how and who he really was. And so anyway, the ceremony arrives. It's about twilight. It's starting to get dark. 40 of us sitting around in a circle. The shaman starts to give some basic instructions. And then, I think some pieces of paper were passed around so that we could write down our intention. And that was something that was to be private. They were not collected or nothing like that. Nobody else could see them. I think it was a way to just kind of nail down exactly in our minds why we were here, what the purpose of this was, because we're about to jump on this roller coaster, right? And so he starts calling people up one by one to actually take the ayahuasca. A quick note about that. For me, ayahuasca tastes like a combination of prune juice and just dirt. I know everyone has their, I was like, good God, this is like, it's either prune juice and dirt or, or there's something, odd about the flavor of this. what he did was right before receiving and giving you the ayahuasca, he looked into your eyes. He asked you, how are you feeling? And, and then he took your pulse. So the whole time he's looking at you and he's asking you this question, he's got his hand on your pulse. And I think he's probably just doing a preliminary, assessment of making sure, okay, well, this person's calm, they're relaxed. Obviously, it makes sense if somebody is perhaps too nervous, maybe it's not the right moment. And I said, well, I feel good. I feel good. I took my first cup of ayahuasca. Everyone got their first very small cup, went back and sat in the same position they were in the circle. I would say about 15, 20, 30 minutes passed when I started seeing that the other people in the circle were very visibly affected by them. It felt a little bit like some scenes out of Dante's Inferno, because I started to see people visibly, it seemed like they were affected by just horrible emotional turmoil. They were safe. There was no immediate threat in the environment, so I knew it wasn't that. But it seemed like emotionally they were dislodging or kind of, letting out all of this negative emotional energy. And I was like, good God, like that person over there is going through. And then it very soon became like a chorus of wails, right? You just hear wailing. And I was like, wow, like that wasn't everyone's experience, but there was a moment when I saw that and I was like, good God, this is like Dante's Inferno here. Like, it's just wailing and lamentations. And, but obviously that was as a result of the medicine. I'll fast forward a little bit, probably about an hour and a half into having taken the first cup. I felt nothing, literally. I felt zero. I was sitting there feeling like a fool because I'm witnessing, what is just like remarkable behavior around me. And I'm just there like, well, whoop-de-doo, and just nothing going on. And at some point, the shaman stood up and said, if anyone would like a second, I guess, hit, I'm struggling for a better word. It's not really a hit, but if anyone would like a second dose, I guess is a better word, now would be a good time. Well, I mean, I almost jumped off the floor because I was like, oh, I got to get something, like I'm here. And then, so similar to before, he looked at me in the eyes and he grabbed my wrist and was taking my pulse. And he said, how do you feel? And I said, look, I don't feel anything. I know I took, some earlier, but I don't feel anything. I feel exactly the same. And he looked at me rather curiously. And then he said, okay, he said, I'm going to give you a special dose. Now I thought initially, okay, this guy's going to give me like half a gallon of this stuff. Well, he actually gave me even less than he gave me the first time. And I was a little skeptical because I thought, well, I don't know. I don't see what this is going to do. It's even less than last time. Whatever. I took it. I went back to my place in the circle. And not 5 minutes later, I was in a completely different world. And the transition is, I usually compare it to a dream where for those of in the audience who have dreams, that there are these transitions that you're never aware of. What I mean is you could be in the dream, you could be at home with your family, and before you know it, you're in some jungle or you're in somewhere else with an entirely different set of people doing entirely different things, and you don't even know where that transition was or how it happened. It all just seems to bleed together. Well, that's how it happened. I remember just sitting there in the circle and thinking, okay, this is where I'm at. This is who I am. So all of a sudden being entirely, it seemed like somewhere else, experiencing different things and not really being able to capture how that had happened or why that had happened. And, it's like a roller coaster. Once it takes off, you're along for the ride, whether you want to or not. It was absolutely terrifying in the beginning. I remember at some point I even tried to steal my friend's car. So that's how scared I was. I was like, oh, there's my friend's car. Let me break into it and drive home, which would have been an outrageously bad idea. because I was in no condition even to walk. It's funny because when I stood up to walk, I seemed to have lost kind of all motor skills. I remember kind of stumbling around like Frankenstein and almost as if I forgot how to walk. I was like, so weird. I can't even walk. I remember I called my parents because I was convinced that I was dying and that I was going to die. And I thought, well, like many other people, you want to call your loved ones. And, you know, so I called my parents. They actually picked up. So I feel bad about that now because I must have just completely like horrified them. You know, what's going on? Well, what's happened? Well, I'm in the desert, right? You know, I'm with a bunch of people I don't know, and I took some drug, and you know, and they're like, "What? You know, well, where are you?" Well, I don't know. I laugh about it now, but they're still to this day not laughing about it. And at some point, one of the shaman's helpers, there was this young lady named Valerie, I want to say, and she found me kind of just stumbling around. And I don't know why, because I knew that this was, okay, this is Valerie, this is this person. But when I saw her in that moment, for me, it was like almost like this spirit figure, this very feminine, spirit loving, nurturing figure just showed up. And she was able to basically to calm me down. I don't remember exactly what she was saying to me, but everything that she said seemed to express or communicate just a profound love and safety and nurturing. And that was able to kind of, you know, take the edge off, more or less stabilize me. I remember she massaged my shoulders a little bit, and it just felt, you know, it felt really good. It calmed me down. From that moment forward, for the remainder of the experience, I experienced just sublime joy and ecstasy. I'm very grateful for both the shaman and her in particular, because I mentioned earlier that when I first met the shaman, I thought, well, if this guy's a shaman, then, you know, I'm the emperor. You know, there's no way this guy's a shaman. But once you were under the influence of the ayahuasca, everybody transformed. The people who you thought were there with you were actually somebody different. The shaman that you had just met moments ago actually turns out to be somebody very different. Under this influence, it was like he was this kind of king. It was like he was this, in this other world, so to speak. It was like he was this prominent, powerful figure. Whereas at the level of ordinary everyday reality, of ordinary everyday consciousness, as I mentioned, you know, you might have mistook him as just a common homeless person. You know, nothing necessarily special about him necessarily. But again, under the ayahuasca, this person seemed to transform, and they seemed to have a great deal of power and wisdom, and you could sense it. It was something that emanated from them. You know, he began to, you know, chant various songs, which
Icarus or whatever they're called, right?
Icaros, yeah. And again, I want to make the point that from the point of view of ordinary everyday reality, you hear these chants or these songs, these whistling noises, and you think, fuck is the point of that? You know, I don't care. It's just a whistling. It's just a song. And it's true at that level. But under the influence, these things took on a life of their own, and they actually seemed to transmit a kind of a salutary, a kind of healing and curative message. It was almost like downloading information into yourself. You know, the information was being downloaded from these songs, from these chants, the whistling. And I remember having the sense that I could control my environment however I wished. I remember speaking aloud at one point and saying, what time is the sun coming out? Because we did this at night. And somebody turned and said to me, well, what time would you want it to come up?
Yeah.
And I immediately understood, again, from the point of view of ordinary everyday reality, that's incoherent. It's like, oh, that's nonsense. What do you mean? What time do I want it to come up? It comes up at this time. We all know that. But under this influence, within this particular state of consciousness, I immediately captured what he was trying to communicate, which was that it was actually I who was fashioning and creating my experience as I'm having it. And that if I so desired, I could actually make the sun come up right now. I tested this. At one point, I took a finger and pointed it up at the stars, and I realized I could move them around. I could pick a star and move it, elsewhere in space, and arrange them in ways that, however I wanted to. Obviously, we don't seem to have that capacity under ordinary everyday consciousness, but it's a power, it's an ability that I seem to wield, and I'm sure I wasn't the only one while under this influence. Remarkable experience. It really shook me up to my core in both a good way and a bad way. And as I mentioned, it only added further conviction and experience to what already were some of my beliefs.
How was it after? Because I know that I've been studying and I've been kind of, I guess, naturally attracted to people who talk about non-duality. And one of the interesting point was made by a speaker is he kind of compared non-duality and psychedelics. So psychedelics can give you that momentum push for a few months, but after that, you're going to go back to your old habits and old ways. And then he compared it to non-duality of like thinking this way. It's just coming back, kind of eliminating who's me, who's you, like who's the I, and just getting deeper into levels. But what were the struggles after? And was there something that you seen completely new of yourself after the experience?
Yeah, so immediately afterwards, I can confidently say that I was an entirely different person. Or perhaps it's better to say that I was enhanced uh, exponentially,
Mm-hmm.
I would say. And this became very clear and evident to everyone around me. They thought something magical had happened to me, or like they're like, good God, like suddenly this person is possessed with wild confidence, complete belief. It's like you're making magic happen with every movement, with every word. That was my experience for about a couple of weeks after the ayahuasca ceremony. I thought I could do no wrong. I was generating great outcomes everywhere I went. All of my exchanges and encounters with people were positive and very, very good. And so I thought, good God, like I was ready to throw myself on the floor and just with gratitude and just thinking, now I've made it. Like, right?
I'm here.
Right, I did it. But as you correctly mentioned, that sensation does wear off. That's still
What do they call the afterglow or whatever?
exactly the afterglow. That's still the medicine operating inside you and unbeknownst to you, because you're no longer having the visuals or the hallucinations or the experiences of non-ordinary reality. You think, oh, okay, I got it. Now it's me. Now it's in me. But it does wear off, and it's gradual. It's gradual over the course of like 1 to 5 days. From the moment when it starts, it took me about 5 days when I had effectively reverted back to ordinary everyday Alfredo, which was a colossal disappointment in a way, because it's like having superpowers and then suddenly being stripped of them. It's like, oh wait, now it's just back to me. So that was kind of a disappointing, but of course the lesson there was that now you have the experience of what's possible, and so now you have a real target to aim for. Whereas before it might be nebulous and, oh, well, I'm seeking awareness or enlightenment or these vague notions, right? Now you have firm experience, something to put your feet on, and that makes it a tangible goal to work towards. Now, it is true that you can work with the medicine, as in ayahuasca or psilocybin or, other options. But, I'm a big fan of an idea from Alan Watts where he says, in reference to psychedelics, is, once you get the message, you hang up the phone.
Oh yeah, he talked about the ashtray and making everybody see God there too.
Right. And so I think that psychedelics do have an important and potentially transformative message for us. but I never advocate for them as being the solution to
Yep.
to almost any problem. They can point you in the direction of a solution. They can show you that a solution truly does exist, where you feel it, not only see it, but you feel it, and it becomes a part of you for a second or for moments. But after that, it remains for you to test your sincerity and see if, well, is this truly something that you were looking to pursue, which is to, have an encounter with yourself, to have a confrontation with your soul, to borrow a term from Jung. And because that was my chief interest to begin with, that was what led me to psychedelics to begin with, it became a lot easier afterwards to redouble my desire to go along this path. And so it doesn't make it necessarily any easier, because you still have to wade through and navigate through, sometimes some pretty stiff weeds, but ultimately that's what led me to psychedelics to begin with. As I mentioned, I wanted to heal myself.
How did that translate to your work after that experience? And in terms of, were you already talking about psychedelics before? Were you an advocate, kind of maybe a little bit behind the doors, or were you openly discussing, especially on LinkedIn? I mean, in 2016, I joined LinkedIn just for the shits of it, and I'm like, okay, whatever. And 4 years later, when I look at people with farms selling tons of hemp on LinkedIn statuses, it made me rethink. I'm like, wow, actually, like, cool people, you can talk about psychedelics. No one really cares. Only the people that are interested in you care.
Definitely. So I was more of an underground advocate with select, and in private company. Then I felt comfortable discussing, some of these experiences, discussing my background with them, my experience with them. But it's not anything that I'd ever publicize, largely because in some cases it's almost professional suicide, right? Depending on the context you're operating in. And so it was I never even had the temptation to publicize it in any way. I felt like I had these powerful experiences. I knew that it was not for everybody. I knew that many people would be extremely resistant to such an experience. You put me in front of the average person to discuss this, they'll think I'm a madman, and I can understand why, because from the operating system that they're experiencing the world, these things are received as madness, and perhaps in a way it is a kind of madness from the point of view of our ordinary everyday thinking. So, but when I started to see the landscape changing, when I started to see that politically and socially there was more of an opportunity to not only discuss these things, but to, share experiences with a broader audience, then I think that encouraged me to speak up, and to share some of these ideas and experiences. I know, first of all, that, many people will brand me as, as, like I said, as a madman, and that's okay. My message is not for them. But I'm more focused on the people for whom, my message hits home, because I believe that, again, when somebody has an open heart, these substances, these experiences, can generate a remarkable outcome in your life that can be curative.
What are you working on currently right now? I know you're self-employed. Maybe you've shifted towards psychedelic companies as well. Because in the last week, I think because of you, my algorithms on LinkedIn changed, and I'm going to interview a few psychotherapists that are specifically working with, I think, psilocybin, and the other ones with ketamine. So it's just interesting to me how, me personally, I think I was running away from, and when I was 17, I was already talking about psychedelics, marijuana, like changing the world. I was kind of like an anarchist, just because of, I think, when moving here from Europe, I got picked on in the first week by every single race. And I was like, the skin color doesn't matter anymore to me. So I started skateboarding. And I think just because of that rebellious community, my whole goal was like, hey, I want to skate, do my media company, and just experience the world. And I think early on, that was like the big impact for me, where I was talking about it in high school. And I think a lot of people looked at me as I was crazy. I was still young, and in high school, you're more susceptible to alcohol, and it's cool to drink a little bit more. When you talk about psychedelics or anything, you're completely off. You're completely off. And I feel like the last few years for me has been like naturally, since something I've been running away, people show up like you, just pop up on comments, and I'm like, you see, it's just naturally coming here together. So I was wondering if you're shifting towards that community as well, maybe working together, and just give me a little bit of update of what you're doing, what projects you're working on, and where can people find you?
Yeah, so just because of the whole global situation with the virus, I won't mention it by name because I think by naming things we add more power to them, and I don't want to add more power to that. So this virus going around, I was laid off in February from what was my full-time role at that time. Since then, I have done some freelance work with clients and all that, but it made me think about, okay, well, the world is changing. I have these skill sets. I have this background, and I don't want to come out of this the same person. How can I? There's an opportunity for me to like reinvent myself. And well, what are my core interests and passions? And then I somehow kept circling back to psychedelics, which really is just one ingredient of a broader interest, which is self-exploration, psychology, healing, these type of things. I don't want to put the emphasis on psychedelics. It's just one of the ingredients in the conversation. And then I thought, well, I'm already in contact with a few people in the psychedelic space. And I decided it's something I wanted to explore more. It's growing. It's still kind of at a seed stage almost. But, I think within the next, 5 to 10 years, it could be what marijuana and the cannabis industry is today already, where it seemed out of nowhere, these dispensaries popped up. I'm not sure to what degree they're regulated yet, but I'm sure the regulation will come. Nonetheless, I thought, well, there's an opportunity here for healing. I thought mental health, as for too long, as far as I know, for decades, there's been no real innovation in mental health. You think of the innovation that's taken place over the last few decades across various sectors is remarkable. It's an order of magnitude that's exponential. Mm-hmm. Yet in areas like mental health, there's been virtually zero innovation. That's a problem. That's a problem because it's not something that we can gloss over or neglect. It's a silent killer that affects people all over the globe in sundry different ways, and it's invisible. It's very easy to see, oh, my foot hurts, let me go to a podiatrist, or my arm hurts. As I said, the body is always immediately verifiable. But when you're hurting in your soul, when you're hurting in your mind and your emotions, who do you really go to for that?
It's a code.
Yeah. And so that's my broader interest, is in being part of an effort to provide some of these healing modalities for the people that need them. And for the people that don't, well, I mean, that's great. Congratulations for them. More power to them. God bless them. But I think my focus has become now the people who are suffering in silence.
What would be the last message for the people in the audience watching? What would be something profound that you would give?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how profound I can make it, but I would say that it's important to value questions more than to value answers. And really questions that relate to yourself, not necessarily to the environment. I would say before you go out and try to affect change in the world, to really start with yourself, to really take responsibility and ownership over yourself, over this journey that you're on in your life. Know that you have tremendous value to add to the world, but not until you've healed yourself. And so you feel like if you're struggling with something, like if you're held back by something, you're capable of so much more, but for X reason, you've not been able to realize it. Understand that there may be something amiss in the machinery. The machinery, I mean, it could be your body, it could be your emotions, it could be your mind. There is help out there. You're part of a very strong army. There's many people who are in this. For many years we've been operating kind of underground, and so that's why there's not much visibility. But I would say that who we think we are is not anywhere near what the truth is. We need to spend a lot more time trying to really figure out and have a sense and feeling for who we are for real, not who we think we are, not what our parents or what our society wants us to be, not what all the screaming heads say, but who are we within our own sacred sanctum, which is within ourselves. And then to have the courage to live from that place, because that's what people really admire. People really admire others when you can see that they're living from a genuine place in themselves.
Where can people find you, perhaps even for business inquiries or even having you on the podcast?
Yeah, I felt bad about this because I've had so many websites over the years, and for X reasons, I've shut them down, largely because when I seek to reinvent, I try to kind of burn the past or eliminate the past so that I can start fresh. I don't have a website where people can follow me, but people can follow me or connect with me on LinkedIn. Right now, that's probably the place that I'm most active on anyway. I did have a lot of social channels years ago, but I've slowly tried to kind of not be so present on social media, partly because it's addictive and partly because I didn't feel like I was getting enough value out of it. But I am on LinkedIn quite a bit. I will continue to be on LinkedIn because I've met some wonderful people there. I think that's where I've been able to broadcast some of these messages with the most success. I want to say that link to my page would be linkedin.com/IN/A Lopez Consulting. I want to say.
Alfredo Lopez Consulting. We'll put the link down for sure.
Okay, excellent.
Cool. Alfredo, appreciate it. It was supposed to be an hour. It was a little bit over 2 hours, so I appreciate your time. I don't know if you had something to do, but I could just go on and on with conversations, and hopefully I'll have you back on soon and to check in what you're doing and have another long conversation, because there's a lot of things that I wanted to discuss about, but time is limited.
Yeah, I mean, before closing, I definitely want to make it a point to thank you, Paulius. I want you to know that the work you're doing is extremely valuable, perhaps beyond what you're aware of, because oftentimes we don't see the validation immediately, but, this conversation alone for me is proof that there's a tide change, there's a sea change. I think you can be an instrumental part of that. Thank you for seeing something in me that made you invite me. I think it's important that people not only have these conversations, but listen to these in the hopes that they feel more emboldened and encouraged to take a step forward, to really have an affirmation towards life and themselves. I can see you're a young guy. You remind me in some ways of myself when I was a little bit younger. Dude, you got everything, man. You got all that it takes. I wish you the best. Definitely let's stay connected. And thanks again.